We're going to get started. To introduce Ambassador Russell. Can I have your attention, please? Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed your lunch or are enjoying your lunch, and thank you so much for being back in your seats by 1:15. I'm very pleased and honored to be able to introduce our keynote speaker, Catherine Russell, Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues at the U.S. State Department. Ambassador Russell leads the commitment to ensure that women's issues are fully integrated into the conduct of U.S. foreign policy. Prior to assuming this position in August 2013, she served as Deputy Assistant to the President and Chief of Staff to Second Lady Dr. Jill Biden, focusing on military families and higher education. During her tenure at the White House, Ambassador Russell coordinated the development of the administration's strategy to prevent and respond to gender-based violence globally. She previously served as a senior advisor to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on International Women's Issues. Ambassador Russell has been an inspiring voice defending the rights of women and girls all over the world to be able to live to their full potential. As ambassador, she and her team have championed the efforts to end gender-based violence, as well as adolescent girls' access to education and healthcare, and many other issues. Please help me to welcome Ambassador Catherine Russell.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you all for having me. This is a beautiful space. I've never been here before. It's really lovely, and it's so nice to see so many familiar faces, so I really appreciate the invitation. This is an exciting time. I think everyone feels that, to be working on gender equality in the international development area. After all, 2015 is a major year for development and for women and girls. We're celebrating the 20th anniversary of the UN World Conference in Beijing, and shining a spotlight on those 11 powerful words that then First Lady Hillary Clinton said so famously: women's rights are human rights, and human rights are women's rights. These words illustrate the potential of conferences and conversations like the one we're having here today to become milestones and movements. That statement became a seminal moment, one that pushed the envelope in ways we couldn't really imagine at the time. Today, of course, Hillary Clinton's 11 words seem non-controversial, at least in most settings. In my work at the State Department, I find that we no longer have to make the case that gender equality is the right thing to do, or even that it's a strategic thing to do. I think that argument has really been made and won. When we talk about how gender equality is critical to U.S. foreign policy and development, people nod their heads. They really seem to get it at this point. Where the conversation has shifted is to how we can best accomplish that work, how we can empower women and girls and engage men and boys in the process to create a more stable and more prosperous world. The celebration of Beijing Plus 20 provides an opportunity to have that discussion, to recognize the progress we've made, examine what's working, and reaffirm our commitment to gender equality. In addition to the Beijing anniversary, this year also includes the post-2015 Development Agenda Summit and the Financing for Development Conference. So 2015 is an historic opportunity for the world to come together and define a common vision for the world we want to see in the year 2030, a world where political systems and economies are far more inclusive, a world where we are stemming the impacts of climate change and have healthier oceans and forests, and a world where well-governed, peaceful societies are the norm. But to realize any of these goals, gender equality must be at the core of the development agenda. To realize any of these goals, the world needs to come together and declare 2015 as our next Beijing moment, the year that we move the conversation forward in the same powerful way that the UN conference did back in 1995. I know that many of you are working to do just that. Fikiri, I'm so sorry I'm going to do this to you, Enzo Yaseng, I'm so sorry, I'm so bad at that, is showing the world how men can can and do lead on gender equality with his work on gender-based violence in Burundi. Theo Soa is doing groundbreaking work to support women's organizations on the continent of Africa. Lori Michaud has helped launch a program that takes a powerful community-based approach to gender-based violence and HIV/AIDS, a program that is now in more than 15 countries around the world. And that's just 3 of the hundreds gathered here today. I'm very proud to say that my office, indeed the entire State Department, is part of this movement as well. Under the leadership of President Obama and Secretary Kerry, we've integrated a focus on gender equality into our national security policy. And we're working at every level, from our engagement on the SDGs to our diplomatic relations to our programming and development to make real progress on this issue. Today, I'd like to share with you where we're focusing our efforts to achieve and advance gender equality and empower women and girls. First, this may not be surprising given what Andrea said, we recognize that gender-based violence is a global pandemic that demands our absolute concerted attention and efforts. I travel a lot. Every country I go to, I see the same sorts of issues, and really no country has solved this problem, including the United States. Gender-based violence defies borders, class structures, religions, and races, and it takes a very heavy toll on individuals and families, on communities and countries, and on the global economy. We see the consequences of that toll when a woman can't go to work after she's been beaten by her partner. We see it when a young girl is forced to leave school and marry before she's fully grown. And we see it when a woman is attacked on her way to the water well or while she's waiting for a bus. It's exactly what happened to a young woman named Lakshmi, who received the Secretary's International Women of Courage Award last year. I hope some of you were at that ceremony, because she was so inspiring. When she was 16, she turned down a friend's brother who wanted to date her, and in anger, he found her waiting at a bus stop, and he threw acid on her face as revenge. Today, Lakshmi is an advocate against gender-based violence, and her courage and resilience should inspire all of us who do this work. But her story should also make us angry. Lakshmi represents one of every 3 women who experiences gender-based violence around the world and finds that their lives are irreversibly changed in that process. That's why we're taking action to not only respond to gender-based violence, but hopefully to prevent it in the first place. One of the areas I'd like to highlight today is our work to end FGMC. Last July, the State Department launched a new program in Guinea, a country with a very high prevalence of FGM. Under this program, we're working with the government of Guinea to develop a national action plan. We're collaborating with NGOs to hold training sessions in local villages and engage men and boys there. We're asking survivors and imams to speak out. And most importantly, we're lifting up the voices of Guinean women and girls to spread the message that FGMC in Guinea needs to end. Our goal is to end gender-based violence in all its forms, but that task is daunting. Recently, I traveled to Iraq and Jordan to better understand the challenges facing Iraqi women and girls, particularly those forced to leave their homes because of ISIL. I met with both men and women who told me how ISIL has made life hell for women and girls in particular. The situation is especially grim for minority populations there. Thousands of girls and women were abducted by ISIL last summer. Many, including girls as young as 7 or 8, were repeatedly raped and forced to marry ISIL fighters. Others have been sold as slaves. The United States has taken action to help. We're providing both humanitarian aid and other kinds of assistance. We're committed to continuing our work with the government of Iraq, with NGO partners there, and the UN to address the needs of those who are affected by what's happening. But the international community needs to do more to protect and better serve women and girls affected by conflict. Because when it comes to sexual violence in conflict, we have to approach this issue as an atrocity that can and must end. Secretary Kerry has compared ending sexual violence in conflict today to ending the use of chemical and biological weapons after World War I, because that's really what sexual violence is. It's a weapon. It destroys lives, it fuels conflict, and it stands in the way of lasting peace. And we can do something to stop it. For example, we can make sure perpetrators are brought to justice. That's what we're trying to do in the DRC, where horrific violence against women is pervasive. we're working to build a coherent approach to justice, and we are starting to see some results there. Judges are holding open trials in local areas so witnesses can testify in their own communities. In turn, those communities can see firsthand that sexual violence will not go unpunished and that impunity will not be tolerated. And this program doesn't just protect survivors, although that is, of course, very important. It also contributes to efforts to collect evidence and hold trials. In other words, it's bringing the promise of justice home to communities that have very little reason so far to believe in it. And that promise goes beyond ending sexual violence. These courts give citizens an opportunity to settle disputes without violence, which means the rule of law is more likely to be respected. And that makes for a more stable and prosperous country. Those are just a few examples of how we're tackling gender-based violence. It's important work if we hope to unleash women's full potential. In many narratives, women are portrayed as victims. And while that is too often true, it's not the whole story. Women are also incredible agents of change. They wield influence in their communities, they bring unique insights to decision-making tables, and they increase the effectiveness of government. That's why our second priority focuses on women's participation. As I said before, this is an area where people understand the strategic value, if not the moral good, in promoting gender equality. And while we certainly do need more data, and we need to continue to build an evidence-based case and illustrate what works, we have numbers that show the power of women's participation. For example, we have data showing that states with higher levels of gender equality use less violence to manage crises than states with lower levels of gender equality. That's why in places like Syria and South Sudan, we've been pushing hard for women's inclusion in peace talks. Our diplomats around the world do this despite many on-the-ground challenges because we know we just can't leave half the population behind. This is true in the economic realm as well. Women already play powerful roles in our economies. They're workers and consumers. In fact, they're often in charge of families' everyday purchasing decisions. And yet, there are still places around the world where women are told they don't belong in business or they need their husband's permission to get a loan. In every country around the globe, there are stereotypes and cultural attitudes that send a message to women and to girls about their proper roles. And those attitudes are often ingrained in laws and practices that make it harder for a woman to start her own business or make a fair wage simply because of her gender. But what we see over and over again is that these barriers don't hold back only women. They hold back entire communities and economies as well. Experts have estimated that if women's labor force participation rose to comparable male levels, GDP would rise too, by 5 percentage points in the United States, by 9 in Japan, and by 34 in Egypt. Every day we are asking ourselves and asking governments around the world, can we really afford not to invest in women's economic participation? But pushing for more women in the workforce is just part of the solution. Pushing for women's political participation is equally important. Last time I traveled to Japan, I met the mayor of Yokohama, who was the first woman to hold her job. And as mayor, she's made it a priority to increase access to childcare so moms could go back to work. In a remarkably short period of time, she reduced the waiting list for daycare from several thousand families to 0, which is really, truly astounding. Her leadership did more than address concerns for women. It also addressed an issue that was holding back the local workforce and the local economy. That's what happens when a country's politicians represent not just some, but all of its citizens. Our approach to gender equality should do the same thing. It should include not just some, but all. As we advocate for the views and needs of women to be taken into account, or as we design programs or strategies that aim to empower women, we need to pay particular attention to those who are often marginalized: lesbian, bisexual, and trans women, women with disabilities, women from ethnic and religious minorities, older women, and indigenous women and girls. And we absolutely must engage and empower men and boys to be part of our efforts. We overlook these groups at our own peril, and that's why my third and final priority is adolescent girls, a group that has been too often overlooked in women's empowerment efforts. Today's girls are tomorrow's mayors and entrepreneurs, judges and educators, mothers and workers. So let's start empowering them now while so much is still possible by investing in their future. Let's make sure they finish not just primary school, but also secondary school, with a diploma in hand, ready to contribute to their economies. We've seen how this kind of goal is within our reach. In the past 15 years, the international community has made access to primary school a priority, and we've made some real progress in that area. But the data show that we are losing girls at the secondary level. Once a girl reaches her adolescence, she's at greater risk of dropping out. This is a time in her life when she has more responsibility at home. She's at high risk for early and forced marriage and for contracting HIV/AIDS. And her family may spend the money needed for education on other things. This is the reality for some 30 million adolescent girls who are not in school, and it's a reality we'd like to change. That's why in March, the President and First Lady announced a new initiative called Let Girls Learn. It aims to help adolescent girls finish secondary school. And again, this is a good example of how in the Obama administration, we are working every day and at really every level to advance women and girls. But as everyone here knows, improving the lives of adolescent girls requires a holistic approach. There really is no easy answer to the problem. Ultimately, we have to change the way the world views girls. We have to show that communities and countries are missing out when their girls are prevented from achieving their fullest potential. We have to demonstrate that education is the best opportunity for the future of every daughter, regardless of whether she's married or pregnant. That's no small task. It requires a comprehensive approach that takes the full picture into consideration: laws and institutions, infrastructure and security, health and reproductive rights, and of course, cultural values. But we know it's worth the effort. We can see when we look around at adolescent girls here and around the world. I try to meet with these young women and girls wherever I travel. And one of the most courageous I've met is a young woman from Malawi named Memory Banda. Memory is a powerful example of how education can change lives. As an advocate for girls, she offers free writing lessons to adolescent moms in her neighborhood. She visits the families of girls who are in danger of being married, and she encourages them not to get married. She's part of a grassroots campaign to build networks for girls and end child marriage in her country once and for all. Memory does this work because she's seen in her own life how education and gender-based violence can change a girl's path. Her younger sister, Mercy, was just 11 when she got pregnant during a so-called sexual initiation ceremony that's typical in their region. During these ceremonies, girls are forced to have sex with an adult man to prepare for marriage. And like many girls who end up pregnant after the ceremony, Memory's sister had to drop out of school. No matter what situations girls find themselves in, whether they become an adolescent mother like Mercy or an advocate for girls like Memory, it's our job to make sure they have the opportunity to pursue their dreams. I'd like to end by coming back to Secretary Clinton's words: women's rights are human rights, and human rights are women's rights. People have written op-eds, even books about those words and the moment they marked in 1995. I think for us, the question is, what will people say about 2015? In 20 years, what will be the markers and policy achievements that they look back on at that point? Obviously, I can't see into the future, but I can hope, and I can work toward the idea that 2015 is a big year for gender equality. It's a year of reflection, of taking stock of how far we've come since Beijing 20 years ago, and of finding big and bold ways to push forward. It's the year we put gender squarely at the heart of the post-2015 development agenda. It's a year we commit to research that measures the impact of women and girls' full participation and in a consistent manner. And it's a year we invite the entire international community, NGOs, government officials, community leaders, women and men, to join us as real partners and make 2015 our own Beijing moment. So thank you all very much for being here.
Ambassador Russell, as always, as an inspiring discussion about how the State Department is prioritizing girls and women all over the world. So thank you so much. I have a question for you, and then I'm going to open it up to our audience, and I'm sure they have many questions too. My question is really about how we engage men and boys in female empowerment. And so it's a two-part question. So how do we engage men? And then when we're looking at strategies for really trying to achieve gender equality, what do you think are some of the best strategies in terms of male engagement and female empowerment as we're trying to achieve gender equality, and how can that be incorporated or prioritized by the State Department, these synchronized strategies?
Well, first on the question of men and boys, it's interesting because I sometimes think for so long women have been fighting to get to the table and be part of the discussion. One of the consequences of that, though, I think, is that so often we're at the table alone, right, with other women, and we're talking to each other about these issues, and we all understand the issues and we agree with each other. But in the same way that we needed to be included in the first place, we need to now make sure that men are part of the discussion as well, because I think the key point in any of these solutions, questions, problems is that these are issues that affect everyone. They affect everyone in a family, in a community, in a country, and if we look at it, obviously there are different impacts, but men have to be part of the discussion. A lot of times, especially when you do work on gender-based violence, the discussion about men is a lot of times as perpetrators. And certainly, that there is that. But men are also an important part of the solution. They're fathers. I spent some time with Malala's father, who is really passionate about when he talks about when she was first born and he first looked at her, and from the earliest moment, he wanted her to have every opportunity. And he made sure that she got to school, and he's just a fierce defender of the rights of all girls to participate. And I think just as women are important agents of change, so are men, and men need to be a part of this discussion. I often say this, I have 2 children. I have a son and a daughter. They're both teenagers. And I know, and it's anecdotal, obviously, but people don't come out of the womb with preconceived notions about gender and who's going to do what. Those are learned behaviors. And just as mothers play a critical role in teaching their boys, and we're really focused on this right now when we're looking at some of the counterterrorism efforts, so too do fathers play an important role in how girls see themselves and how boys treat girls. So this discussion needs to include both. Our programming looks to include both. I was saying earlier that we started we're opening these women's economic centers in different parts of the world. The first one we opened was in Pakistan. And the idea is to support women as entrepreneurs. And so it has all sorts of programming for women who are interested in starting either small or medium-sized businesses. And it includes mentoring as a key component. But it also has programming for men and boys. Some of that is on gender-based violence, and some of it is for men on why it's important for women to be able to participate in the economy. And so I think we're trying now to look at that as a important and key part of our efforts. As to, I think your second question was sort of what we see, how we approach this and what works. I think the most important way to approach this, in my view, and I think this is right, not just because it's my view, but I think it's that we need to try to approach these issues holistically. And too often, the United States government is a very big thing, behemoth, right? And there are lots of people doing lots of work in different areas, but often it's not coordinated. And that's true. I'm sure it's true in all of your organizations. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. We're very focused on trying to make sure that our office is playing the role of setting the strategy and then coordinating with everybody to the extent that we can in the department, across the agencies, with USAID, at the White House through an important IPC process that we're engaged with, but also Department of Commerce and others. And I think looking at women as sort of in their entirety, so that if you're looking at the question of gender-based violence, it's not, you can't just say, okay, we're going to change the laws and make sure that people are being prosecuted for gender-based violence. Really what we need to do is make sure girls are educated, that women have access to health care, that women have economic opportunities, or if we're providing economic opportunities, we need to understand that that will have an impact often on, initially on gender-based violence. I think if we look at these issues in a really comprehensive and holistic way, both across the government and in the individual areas that we're working, I think we're going to be much more effective.
Great, thank you. I totally agree. Ambassador Russell has agreed to take some questions from the audience, so we're going to take about 3 at a time. And again, Helen and Ahlam are around the room ready to take your questions. And I see a hand up in the corner there.
Thank you, Ms. Ambassador, for your great speech. I am Sarah. I am serving at Save the Children here in DC in the child protection team. So I don't want to ask you any question, but just a small request. We are talking about gender empowerment, but at the same time, I become afraid when I think about the children. Because when the mothers go out for work, I really think about the children, about their protection. So I want to request you to take parallel initiatives for children, especially whose mothers go out for work, so that the mothers work properly and give concentration on their work and do better in their professional work. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll just respond to that. I think it's an interesting point, and I appreciate that. And I think it illustrates the challenge of, again, women they're not just freestanding beings, right? They have a whole lot of considerations that they have to take into account. And when I mentioned the Yokohama example, in Japan, there has been, I think it's between 67 and 70% of women who have their first child stop working. And that's a challenge in a country like Japan because they have an aging population and they have a very limited immigrant pool to draw from. So basically, in order for the economy to continue to expand, they need to get women to get back to work. Well, the women look at it and they say, oh, okay, but number one, who's going to take care of my children? And number two, why do I want to come back into these jobs that are really dead-end jobs? I think that if we make a determination that if women choose to work, want to work, that they need to have the support to do that. Hopefully the support from their families, but also the support from businesses and the communities. And honestly, this is a problem that we haven't solved in the United States. And sometimes when I'm in these other countries, I feel like we're asking a lot of them. It's not something that we've even really gotten a handle on here. But it's an important point that it is the women have, and I'm not saying that men don't, but women, I think in particular, because they do so much childcare and work around the house and caring for their parents, and then to add work into that is not an easy balance always.
Thank you. Other questions? I see a hand. Yes?
Thank you so much. My name is Gina Cosentino, and I'm a visiting scholar at the Institute for the Study of Human Rights in Columbia. I was wondering, in the course of your work, the extent to which you address and work at the highest levels, whether or not you're addressing issues involving the role of corporations, and the state's responsibility to ensure that human rights, including the women's rights, are being protected fully in agreements and working relationships with mining companies, for instance, where a lot of the violence that's taking place is having a very disproportionate impact on women and leading to violence. The second part of that question is whether or not in the course of your work you're advocating as well for issues involving tenure security of women, so that women collectively are able to hold land in joint tenure with their community, but also have access to it as part of a strategy aimed at improving the lives of women and alleviating poverty and reducing conflict on the ground.
Thank you for that question. I think we are focused on some of these questions. I can't say we're focused on all of them, honestly. We very much want women to be able to participate in the economies of their countries, and I think we see corporations as key parts of that piece and also the other pieces of the work that we're doing. And we are involved in some partnerships with corporations, and looking to them, hopefully as leaders. And I think the corporations, you've seen some of this research now on board memberships, that boards where women are participating tend to be more successful, at least the companies tend to be more successful. The links between those are interesting to look at, but I guess the way we look at this is everybody here has a stake in this issue. Everybody has a stake in making sure that people can participate as fully as possible, and corporations, I think, are a key part of that.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sahar El-Nouri, and I'm Mercy Corps' Senior Gender Advisor. My question is, during an earlier panel, we were talking about how important it is to entrench gender integration and a focus on addressing gender issues, including gender-based violence, in our work moving forward, and to do it in such a way that even when leadership changes, whether it's an administration or an organization, that we don't lose the progress that's been made. The US government has played a big role in helping us to promote the gender equality agenda, to have the conversations that we're having today. And your office has played a big role in that. Do you think that we have done a good enough job of entrenching our gender equality approaches into the US government as of now? And if not, what do you see as the key areas that we all need to work on together so that we don't have to worry about losing the progress that we've made, as we did a little bit at least from 1995? Thank you.
It's a great question.
It is a really good question, and honestly, I ask myself that question every day. Are we doing enough, and what more can we do? I think the interesting thing from my perspective on this, and I talk to so many people about these issues in the State Department, in our embassies around the world, and I think when I said this in my speech, we're no longer making the argument for why it's important. I think I'm not saying that everybody in the world agrees with that, but I do think that generally thoughtful people understand, even if you look, I'm not a sports person, but the secretary always makes the sports analogy about it doesn't make any sense to leave half your team on the bench or whatever. We won't
tell him that you didn't get that right.
No, it's a really good point when he makes it. I just didn't make it effectively. But I think, people understand that, right? It's logical to them. So the question is, how do you do it? And I think it's not always easy, but what I try to do is explain and persuade and show data to show that it's in the interest of whatever the institution is, whether it's a State Department, an embassy, a company, a country, whatever it is. Yes, we believe women and girls are entitled to full rights and opportunities, but we also think it's in the interest of these institutions to support that. And I think most people, and I'm not saying this in a negative way, but most people act in their own self-interest on some level. And so if you can say, look, you will be more successful. I say this, I meet with almost every ambassador who's going out to a country, and I say, you will be more successful if you make sure that women and girls are included fully in what you're doing. The secretary brings all the ambassadors to the State Department once a year, and he has me do this presentation for them. And this year I did one where I showed pictures of all the different places, and it was actually sort of, we should think about putting that on the website, because it's interesting to show different peace negotiating groups, a board of directors in the United States, all these places where there's not a single woman in the picture. And it's striking to see that. I mean, you honestly can't believe it, especially in the United States, but it does happen. And I think I remind them that they will be better and more successful if they incorporate, and it's not just women for the sake of women, it's because you want all the different views and perspectives and experiences represented. I mean, it seems so logical, but sometimes people just don't think about it. I think when they do, they understand it. And I think I have had to testify before Congress on different occasions. I don't think this is a partisan issue. I really don't. It has not come to me that way once on the Hill. Both sides recognize that this is an important effort on behalf of the United States, and that they are broadly supportive. I'm not saying that they will do everything we want, and there certainly are some issues that are stickier than others, but in general, the notion that women deserve full rights and opportunities, I think, is something where, again, we're past the argument, we're just at the how. And to the extent that all of you can continue to reinforce that and help us, particularly, everybody's always looking for data. We love data. We also like anecdotes, things that you can show us, to help us make the argument is tremendously helpful.
Thank you. I think we have the opposite problem in this room. We have about 250 people and maybe 10 or 15 men, which is actually an improvement from last year. We had 250 and 5 men, so we're getting there, but this is kind of the opposite problem. We have time for one more question, and hand has gone up here.
Thank you, Ambassador Russell, and it's good to see you again. We met last summer, I believe, in your office. I'm Stephanie Ortoleva, the president of Women Enabled International. And my question flows around Beijing Plus 20. I agree with many of the things that you said in your speech about how the Beijing Declaration and Secretary Clinton's inspiring words carry us forward. But many of us in the NGO community were a bit disappointed at the Beijing Plus 20 process. The US government was rather good comparatively to other countries in engaging women's rights organizations in your process for producing your reports. But most other countries that I reviewed had no process for that. And then secondly, the so-called working document or conclusions document from Beijing Plus 20, many of us really felt that it didn't reflect us, especially since it was kind of drafted before the whole thing happened in New York, so it was kind of hard to get our views. So I was wondering if you have some guidance for us for Beijing Plus 25, because we'll all be there again. But how can we make sure that we're heard when we're there? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stephanie, for that question, and thank you for the amazing and just really tremendous work that you do. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the question. Civil society, I think at least I should speak for myself, I didn't value civil society nearly as much until I traveled and saw how challenging it is for civil society in so many other countries. Here, I've likened this to getting your teeth cleaned, doing meetings with civil society because they give you such a hard time, but they keep us honest and they push us to do things and they encourage us and they support us, even when they're criticizing us, And so I do really, really appreciate that, because when you see other countries where they don't have that, it's really heartbreaking. And you see people that they feel like, go to some countries, and I met actually not too long ago in Iraq with a woman who works on disability issues, and she said there aren't even conversations about it. It's not even something that people talk about. So first, I thank all of you for what you do, because you play an incredibly critical role in this process, and Stephanie in particular, and on the issues that you work on. I really appreciate it. I would say, I think you especially, because I know you know what to do, which is continue to push us. I think it just makes a difference. I mean, you come in and you talk to me and you make those arguments. Judy Heumann, as you know, is a huge advocate in the department on these issues, and really, I think she gets a lot of support whenever she is out working on these things. But I think, when I was at CSW, there were people who were unhappy about the fact that the document was not negotiated in New York, but before we got there. I think, I know in my office, we've had just countless meetings with civil society about that process before we got to New York. So I take your point. I think with respect to the United States, I think we're pretty fully briefed about what people's concerns were. In other countries, my understanding was really the challenge was that a lot of the civil society folks meet when they have the actual convening. So doing the negotiation beforehand was difficult for them. I mean, we understand that. Certainly, the United States understands that, and I think we are thinking about it going forward about how best to do it. And I recognize that in these countries it can be really challenging. And so I'm not as concerned about what happened here, but I am concerned about what happened in other places, and we are trying to think that through a little bit more. So thank you for your comments.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador, for being with us today. Thank you for giving us your inspiring remarks and taking our questions. And please give Ambassador applause and thank you.